Brethren and friends, on behalf of the Rubicon Masonic Society, thank you as always for joining us for another virtual Masonic education event. This series here tonight, this episode represents our 63rd episode of virtual Masonic education since we started back in 2020. Our series is entitled 21st Century Conversations on Freemasonry. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you. And for those of you who are back again, we appreciate your support and continued participation in the Rubicon Masonic Society Virtual Education Series. Special thanks and shout out always goes to the Ware Lodge of Research, Lexington Lodge No. 1, and of course, all the brethren, honorary members of the Rubicon Masonic Society. We will now proceed with the business of the evening. Worship Brother Dan, would you please do the honors of delivering an opening devotion?
Brothers, our opening and closing prayers this evening are taken from a 1911 Masonic monitor that was authored by a man named J.N. Saunders, who would go on to become Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Kentucky. Most worshipful Brother Saunders offered this ritual to the Grand Lodge of Kentucky. It's a lovely ritual, but it was not accepted. But there are some copies of it, and I'm going to use his prayers this evening. So, brothers, please join me in prayer. Most holy and gracious Lord God, the great architect of the universe, the giver of all good gifts and graces, thou hast promised that where two or three are gathered together in thy name, thou wilt be in the midst of them and bless them. In thy name we assemble, most humbly beseeching thee to bless us in all our undertakings, that we may know and serve thee aright, and that all our actions may tend to thy glory and to our advancement in knowledge and virtue. And we beseech thee, O Lord God, to bless our present assembling and to illuminate our minds that we may ever walk in the light of thy countenance. And when the trials of our probationary state are over, be admitted into the temple not made by hands, eternal in the heavens. Amen.
The moted be. Worship Brother Dan, thank you very much. Brethren and friends, the purpose of our virtual Masonic education series aims to help us to become better men, always devoted to our family, our faith, our country. May we all come together this evening to learn, to subdue our passions, to discipline our minds, and to strive to improve ourselves through the tools of Freemasonry. Any opinions expressed during this virtual series will be those of the presenter or participant. They do not necessarily reflect the views of any lodge or Grand Lodge or the Rubicon Masonic Society. By participating with us, brethren, you consent to our guidelines, and our full disclaimer can be found at rubiconmasonicsociety.com/disclaimer. As you all know, these are not tiled meetings. Masons and non-Masons are more than welcome to attend and participate. So please, brothers, be mindful that anything discussed should be suitable for Masons of all degrees as well as non-Masons. Of course, gentlemanly manners at all times. Please, no alcohol, no smoking, no eating, foul language. No discussion of politics or religion. Recommended attire for each meeting is coat and tie. Please type your name and any appropriate Masonic title or location under your video to identify yourself to others here this evening. If you're not a Mason, please simply type guest after your name. Please enable your video camera so we can see you. Please reduce background noise. And please always be patient should any technical difficulties occur. Brethren and friends, tonight we have Most Worshipful Brother John L. Cooper, who will be presenting on the Enigma of St. John the Baptist. And for a more proper introduction, Worshipful Brother John Bizak, will you please do the honors, sir?
I will, thank you. Dr. John L. Cooper is past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of California. He'll explore with us tonight one of our two patron saints of the craft, St. John the Baptist. Brother Cooper has served as senior counselor of the Southern California DeMolay Association and is an honorary member of the International Supreme Council. Much of his Masonic careers involved researching and writing on the history and symbolism of Freemasonry. And if you've not become familiar with the many topics he's researched and written about, I encourage you to seek them out and share them with other Masons. Brother Cooper, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to see if I can set this view up here so that there we are. I can see all of you. That's great. Well, it's certainly a pleasure to be invited to join all of you this evening for where you are and late this afternoon here in Sacramento, California. It's a wonderful opportunity to share a few thoughts. I always, at the very beginning, like to say, as I did when many years ago as a high school teacher, that anytime I teach something, I learn twice as much from those that I'm teaching that I share with them. The insights and the questions and things are always, to me, extremely important. In addition to that, one of the things that I've learned throughout the years is that it's really impossible for me to know everything about any particular subject. Invariably, I will find some brethren and others that are present who know a great deal more about some of the things that I've talked about or looked into. So you shouldn't feel shy about asking questions or sharing some insights. One of the fun things about these kinds of presentations is that there are things that you can chase down later or correct later or add to later, and that's part of the fun. I've titled this The Enigma of John the Baptist on purpose, because one of the things that I have puzzled about through the years are a couple of areas in Freemasonry where it's been really not easy to find clarity as to why some things are a part of our culture, our history, our tradition, and even our ritual. And as such, the more that I dig into the Saints John, both of them, as a matter of fact, in our ritual, the more I realize there is much, much more to be discovered and learned about this topic. In addition to that, it's much broader than the things that I can share with you in this short presentation this evening. There are topics and things that I thought might be of interest to you that I laid aside because and the understanding of those and dipping into them would take us into all kinds of interesting paths, but probably take a great deal of time. The other thing is that I've discovered, having been doing this for a long time in Freemasonry, is that our culture and our society has changed over time. When I first started writing papers back in the 1960s for Southern California Research Lodge, I could assume that a lot of Masons had a background in Bible stories, a background in people like John the Baptist and John the Evangelist and others, because as I had when I was very young, spent time in Sunday school learning these things. But I've discovered over time that a lot of that knowledge has been lost, laid aside, or never actually experienced in the first place. So I don't want to insult your intelligence and your knowledge by sharing some things that you already know a lot about, because I suspect that you've done the same kinds of background that I have with that. But with that, I'm going to make an attempt to see if I can share the PowerPoint that I put together for this to tell you where I'd like to go with that. So let me get down here to the share. And let's bring this up. And hopefully this is going to work. Let me get my screen over here. There we are. So technical assistance on the other end will let me know if something isn't clear or can't be clearly seen. If you would, I wouldn't necessarily know that from here.
Everything looks good.
So it looks okay. Great. So Freemasonry and the Enigma of John the Baptist. And it's not a long presentation. I tried to pull together some of the key things, but what I would like to do is to move us through some of the information that I've uncovered as to where the information would lead us. The other point is, and you made this in the introduction, that as Freemasons, we've taken obligations as an initiatic society to keep certain things within our own tiled lodges. And as such, it becomes difficult to talk about the ritual of an existing lodge or Grand Lodge of which we may be a member. In addition to that, I'm well aware that jurisdictions, although similar in what they have with their ritual and their wordings, vary from place to place. So the way that I've approached this in the past is to reach out and backward in history, if you will, to some rituals that we know have existed in the past. If you find in this discussion some things that are familiar to you, then that might put you in a position of thinking further about that. And as with all of us, these materials are open and available to Masons and non-Masons alike. So let's take a look at that. By way of background, I would like to have discussed the old charges, the old constitutions of Freemasonry. But without enough time to talk about them in detail, I will point out that although saints are mentioned in that, we don't find references in those early Masonic documents of either St. John the Baptist or St. John the Evangelist, which is a little bit puzzling, because one would think that if they had an important place in Freemasonry, that that's one of the places that they would show up. However, we do have ritual exposures, ritual printings. Basically, there are two kinds of old rituals that are available to us. The first are those that were published with the intent of letting other people know what the secrets of Freemasonry were. And there were those that were handwritten notes, if you will, crib notes, so that Masons might remember that which they had committed to memory. One of the earliest entries reference to a St. John is in this quotation from the Dumfries manuscript. It's about 1710, although there's some argument as to whether or not that is the exact date, and it obviously is based on an older document. Questions and answers were how our earliest ritual exposures showed up. Those were also, as I think many of you know, the first lectures that we had in Freemasonry. They antedated our narrative lectures that are used in most lodges today. So a question and answer was used usually at the degree itself, after the conclusion of it, to focus on some of the things that the lodge wanted the candidate to particularly remember. And in doing that, at some later date, some of these questions and answers became part of what candidates memorized. That's certainly true in California. The remains of those old lectures are now our candidates' lectures, which they memorize, and it's based upon a catechal form of instruction. Catechal meaning, of course, catechism or question and answer format. So here's one from that early manuscript. What lodge were you entered in? Entered being obviously a Masonic reference to an entered apprentice or an apprentice or someone coming into Freemasonry in the first time in a speculative sense. And the answer is in the True Laws of St. John. I did modernize the spelling there, but I did not change the tense of St. John. That's kind of curious because it doesn't say the True Lodge of St. John the Evangelist or St. John the Baptist, it's just St. John, okay? Moving forward through a number of other places where these questions appear or a version of them appear is the very famous 1730 Masonry Dissected. This, as you may remember, is the first time that we had an expose setting forth all 3 degrees of Freemasonry. And here we are at the beginning. From whence came you? And the answer is from the Holy Lodge of St. John, with an apostrophe S. It's possessive. So it's not really any different than the one from the Dumfries manuscript. It is not, as in some contemporary religions, from a lodge of the Holy Saints John, or the Holy Saints John at Jerusalem, as some rituals have it. In this very simple one, it is the Holy Lodge of St. John. Now, at this point, it could be that these questions and answers refer to some of the story being told to candidates as a part of the ritual, or in some cases, it could be trick questions to see if you could memorize it, and you then would refer to something that no one else would know the answers to, something would I would call a trick question or a trap question. I don't think that's what this is. I think these early Masons are referring to their lodges as a lodge of St. John. And we'll see a little bit later how I came to that conclusion. Between 1730 and 1760, there really were no significant information about rituals in England, the Grand Lodge of England, or for that matter, in either Scotland, with a couple of exceptions, or Ireland, where our Freemasonry actually comes from. But if you have a copy of Harry Carr's early Masonic catechisms to take a look at, you can see what kind of stuff was going on the other side of the English Channel in France at the time. I went through those briefly and really did not add any additional thing to our knowledge to share with you today. But if you spend some time in Harry Carr's work, you might find some things that I missed. Three distinct knocks, again, as with its 30-year previous predecessor, Masonry Dissected, was a question and answer format. And in this case, the master is asking the question and the answer is given by someone. Very probably it's by another well-informed Mason, a past master of the lodge, who is rehearsing this after the candidate has experienced his becoming an entered apprentice Mason, to talk about how he came into the lodge. So the master asks, how got you admittance into the lodge? Answer by three distinct knocks. And what was said to you from within? Who comes here? Your answer, brother. One who begs to have and receive part of the benefit of this right worshipful lodge, dedicated to St. John, as many brother and fellows have done before me. A familiar format for many of us who have looked at various rituals, some of which are still in use with that. But again, I call your attention to the fact that St. John is not identified here, and it is certainly not St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, because it is not in the plural. So which one was it? Well, I grabbed some pictures to share with you as a part of this from the internet. Some of them are better than others. If you're doing a presentation, it's a good source of information out there. Some have more skills than I have in finding good stuff, so I'll just simply leave it at that. St. John the Evangelist and St. John the Baptist. Well, harken back to your Sunday school days, and you remember who these were. John the Baptist is pictured in the Gospels in the New Testament as the forerunner of Christ. He's pictured as, his mothers are pictured as cousins, so I guess that would make Jesus and John the Baptist second cousins. The story as set forth about his birth in the Gospel of Luke is pretty straightforward. Mary goes to visit Elizabeth when she's pregnant, and the episode as recounted there is that John recognizes Jesus before he is born, and is going to have important things to say about Jesus implied in that reference in the gospel itself. In the other gospels, particularly in Mark and in Matthew, John shows up on the scene much later as an adult, and he is in the wilderness down at the Jordan River, and he is baptizing, hence the name John the Baptizer, or as we more commonly know him today as John the Baptist. The other John, of course, is one of the 12 apostles, or at least that's the common attribution of the other St. John that we're talking about. I don't have enough time to share very much of anything about St. John the Evangelist, but someone here might have an interest in pursuing that part of the research and discussion at some future time. Been a lot of speculation over time by people as to who John the Baptist was. Some have associated him with an ascetic group of Jewish prophets in existence at the time. Some have identified him with the Essenes, which was one of the groupings within Judaism at the time, a semi-monastic movement centered on the Dead Sea. All kinds of things that sometimes end up in Masonic writings. But I thought tonight I wanted to focus on the Masonic context rather than that other background, although I think it's fascinating to do that, and there's plenty of materials out there to do that kind of research if you have an interest in doing that. I'm going to fast forward and then move backward again in the presentation. I took you to the dumb priest ritual and to the two other rituals that we know about in the 18th century, Masonry dissected in three distinct knocks. Now I'm going to fast forward to California. As in many jurisdictions, our ritual in California is divided into that which is confided to the repository of faithful breasts and that which is printed out. We do not have a plain text ritual in California. The parts of our ritual that are printed out are called in California monitorial work, and the other nowadays is in cipher. But the monitorial work is the one that we are permitted without any kind of problems to print, discuss in a non-Masonic context, and so that's where I'm going to start with this. In the longer form of the lecture of the Interdependence degree in California, what is on your screen there, next to our headquarters on Nob Hill, where I had the privilege of working as our Grand Secretary for almost 18 years. The wording refers to St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist. Lodges were anciently dedicated to King Solomon. As it is said that he was our first most excellent Grand Master, lodges at the present time are dedicated to St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, who were two eminent patrons of Masonry. It's actually a longer excerpt. The part that follows that explains that every regular lodge ought to have a depiction of these two saints, and many of our lodges in California do. And the monitorial ritual goes on to explain that they are embedded in a symbol of two parallel lines, a circle, a dot in the middle, and the holy writings on the top. On the left-hand side, your screen would be St. John the Baptist dressed in the traditional costume that the Gospel is describing as having worn. And since St. John the Evangelist is identified with the author of the fourth Gospel, he's holding a book. I'm not going to take the time to dip into the symbolism here of the parallel lines and the circle and the point. The ritual itself talks about the fact that if we keep ourselves between these two parallel lines, and touch upon the source of revelation of God, that it's impossible that we should materially err. Well, that would take us another whole time to dig into that. If somebody would like to do that research, it's got some fascinating things. You find many articles out there published on that. But I want to show this because I'm trying to look back at who St. John the Baptist was, just one of these two figures in our particular context. So where did California get it? Well, our Grand Lodge was formed in 1850 by 5 lodges. All of them received their work from lodges further east. Our oldest lodge, California No. 1, received its original work from the District of Columbia, Grand Lodge of District of Columbia. Our Western Star No. 2 came from the Grand Lodge of Missouri. Our Tehama No. 3 came from Connecticut. No. 4, which is no longer in existence in California, came from New Jersey. And the last one had a dispensation from a possibly irregular Grand Lodge springing from Mississippi and Louisiana. Again, a story for another time. Our Grand Lodge in the beginning did not have a uniform ritual. In the 1880s, we sent our Grand Lecturer back to Illinois to learn the Barney working, a story perhaps for another time to look into. And our ritual then is sort of standardized today with that of many of the Grand Lodges across the country. Many of them are based on the 1797 book by the man on the left, the brother on the left, Thomas Smith Webb. I couldn't find a picture of the actual 1797 one, so if you look closely, it is actually an 1803 edition that I found for the screen. But the Freemasons Monitor was a series of lectures to accompany the degrees. It was not the secret work of Freemasonry. It's all of what we told candidates about what they had experienced. And because it was so easily put in saddlebags and in covered wagons and other things as people headed west, this has become the basis for very much of the work of American Grand Lodges to this day. And that's why some of the things that I shared from California may have some echoes in what you have in your jurisdiction that would tell the story of that. Well, where did Thomas Smith Webb get his work? Well, let's take another step backwards into history. Whoop. And of course, on the left-hand side is William Preston. I was very interested that your work next weekend is going to be on some of this stuff. I wish I were there to experience what you're going to be hearing from some of those top scholars on the impact of these Masons and others on the development of our ritual. Preston is a fascinating figure. Without spending too much time on him, he, as you may know, was master of the very famous Lodge of Antiquity, which is now number 2 on the register of the United Grand Lodge of England, but maintains that it is actually the oldest of the original lodges that formed the Grand Lodge of England in 1717 or so. And Preston was a student of Freemasonry who wanted to have Masons understand what Freemasonry is all about. If you read his illustrations of Masonry, which you can download easily from the internet as you can with all these works nowadays, I find it fascinating to dip into his understanding of it. I'm going to share 2 slides with you, excerpts on this subject from his work to show you what he was trying to do. So, the work that Webb pulled from was his earlier publication, the section dealing with to whom a lodge is dedicated. That's what to whom is it means. It's the lodge was dedicated. And so his response there, Preston's response is, in latter periods of the world, other distinguished characters have attracted our notice. Hence, John the Baptist stands forward as our leading patron, and to his memory we pay tribute. That's very flowery language, stuff we probably wouldn't use today in describing it, but very typical of the last part of the 18th century. If you ever read Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, 1776, and a brother, you'll know that this was the kind of rhetoric that was common during that period. So then he tries to answer the question, why did John the Baptist? Well, his explanation, in him we have a singular instance of purity of zeal, simplicity of manners, and an ardent wish to benefit mankind by his example. None of that ended up in California's ritual. We have the other explanation about John the Baptist and the parallel lines and things like that. In some respects, I'm sorry that we didn't copy that into it, but it does provide a place for me to talk to candidates when I do coaching, because I get to tell them a little bit more about that. Well, did John the Baptist have any equal? Yes. To carry into execution this great tenet, and so on and so on. Hence to him we pay due allegiance as the patron of our art. And who was considered the equal? We are now going to be looking at John the Evangelist and the reasons why. The last sentence, if you will. In John the Evangelist, therefore, we discover the same zeal as John the Baptist and superior abilities displayed to perfect the improvement of man. Where did Preston get this? Well, if you read Colin Dyer's book on him and others on Preston, the common explanation is that he went around to lodges, listened to lectures being given extemporaneously, some cases perhaps written down with crib notes, picked the best and put it into his book. And that may be true. He was quite a scholar. He was a printer by trade. And putting this information down as a part of the explanation of Freemasonry obviously came from someplace. But the point of this thing is that it's pretty obvious by the second half of the 18th century that both John the Baptist and John the Evangelist are a part of our ritual. And yet, when we look at the ritual exposés of that time period, we don't find them. We have a reference to one, to St. John. So as I said in the beginning, there is the enigma of John the Baptist. It's really the enigma of we have one and now we have two. And where were we talking about two other than in these lectures? I want to transition into the word St. John's as not defined. I picked two of these off the internet to show you that the concept of a St. John's Lodge as a name for a lodge is a very common one. I should have done a little bit further look at the St. John's Lodge in Boston, very, very famous lodge. But there are many in the early colonial and then in the post-revolutionary period, as you can see here in 1803 is one, and here's North Carolina, 1754, with the name St. John's Lodge. So obviously St. John was a popular name, but just like our earlier part of the Enigma, we are really not sure as to whether or not this would have referred to St. John the Baptist or St. John the Evangelist. Now, reference to the minutes of these early lodges might prove that we have more information about that. And so some of you who live near these areas and have the time and the interest to do it, looking at old Masonic minute books is a great way to dip into that. But as most of them are not available online nowadays, those of you on the East Coast have a little bit of a leg up on being able to do that. Our name for St. John's Lodge pops up again and again. It's actually tied to something that is called St. John's Masonry, an apostrophe S, notice again. There appear to be references in Scotland and to a certain lesser extent in England of something called St. John's Masonry. In England, it appears to refer to lodges that did not join the original Grand Lodge in London and Westminster when it was formed in 1717. They were called St. John's Masons, and in several of the secondary reference books that you can take a look at, there are indications that Tyler's registers would show a St. John's Mason next to a signature, meaning that he was considered to be fully a Mason, certainly qualified and entitled to sit in a Masonic lodge, but not of a lodge that was under the Grand Lodge of England or any other Grand Lodge at that time. That may seem a bit strange to us today with our concepts of regularity and recognition and things like that, but you have to remember in this early time that things were not quite so rigorously enforced, if you will, on how recognition would take place. If you showed up and could prove yourself a Mason and it was reasonably good idea that you were telling the truth, and you had some credibility as to where you came from, very likely you would have been sitting in a lodge. Certainly there's a reference in the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1748 to the recognition of some of these St. John's Masons. Remember, the Grand Lodge of Scotland was the last one of the three in the Isles to be formed. It was formed in 1736, but obviously its history is very much older than that. Witness the fact that when Mother Kilwinning Lodge came in, they had to give it number 0 because they'd already used up number 1. In fact, there's more than one number 0. There are 3 of them. So St. John's Masons tied back to the beginning. Here are names of lodges being named St. John's Lodges, and here's Masons showing up that don't belong to any recognized organized lodge as St. John's Masons. There's some speculation that this might have been associated with St. John the Evangelist rather than with St. John the Baptist, if only because the opening lines of the poem in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That beautiful poem has echoes of our Masonic concept of the Masonic word. Witness, for example, the Mason word in Scotland. Maybe that's an area for further research for some of you who may be interested in pursuing that particular one. Whenever I work with students in Freemasonry and others, I share that I've learned through the years that I always want to know the answer to the question, so how do you know that? So how do you know that? I had a Masonic mentor at the very beginning of my journey who did not suffer fools gladly. And many a time he would asked me that question. So how do you know that, John? Where did you get that? And I had to write and rewrite a lot of papers over the years because I didn't have an answer to the question that made sense. So one of the things I try to do is point out that there are some sources out there that have references. I'm going to share just two of them that I have found valuable in this. The two authors that I'm sharing are both British. Tobias Churton is somewhat known because of his research into Gnosticism. He's written wonderful work on Elias Ashmole. He's also a television, or was in the late 80s and early 1990s figure, putting on some popular programs and things that were televised, which you probably can still see on YouTube. But he's got good references. He's a good scholar, in my opinion. And his footnotes will lead you to places where you can look at some original sources, because, of course, this is a secondary source. And The Mysteries of John the Baptist was this 2008 book that he published, which is, I think, worth taking a serious look at. I want to talk just for a moment about St. John the Baptist, since that's what we're focusing on, and the date June 24. We have a habit in some of our Masonic things of not pinning things down because we like to speculate. And some of our speculations are pretty far-fetched, and some of them are places to begin as a thesis for research. I tend to prefer the latter, although I have fun with some of the earlier ones, like many of you do as well. But I want to talk about the date June 24 on the left, and I want to talk about the picture on the right, which I got off the internet, of the Goose and Gridiron Tavern in St. Paul's Square in London. Many of you may have been near the place, as I have when I was in London in recent years. There's a plaque on the wall indicating where the tavern once stood, and it simply says, to paraphrase the plaque, this is where modern-day Freemasonry was founded in England. June 24, 1717. Well, many of you may have read also the paper by Dr. Andrew Prescott, Brother Prescott, and Dr. Susan Summers about whether or not that's a valid date or not. That would another thing that would be kind of fun to chase down sometime in the future. If you haven't read the paper, there are places you can get a copy, and it's fascinating. The two of them are not totally sure that all this wasn't made up at a later time to validate the early beginning of the first Grand Lodge. But I'm going to assume for our purposes here that June 24, 1717 is a valid date when the first Grand Lodge was formed in the Goose and Gridiron Tavern in London near St. Paul's Cathedral. But why June 24? Is there a connection to St. John the Baptist? Well, indeed, there is. Now, I'm going to give you another British author, one that I haven't read several books by him, and I think that he's good, not because he's a good scholar, which he is, in my opinion, but he also has copious footnotes that can take you back to original materials. And nowadays, with the ease of the internet, it's becoming increasingly possible to find scanned copies of original records. So if you enjoy doing that, as I do, there's places that you can look. This is a book that he published a few years back called The Stations of the Sun. And it's a history of the ritual year in Britain. It really should be called the religious or the church ritual year in Britain, because he's going to be talking about festivals and feasts of the church that are linked to popular things. And of course, the 24th of June is the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist. It's found in the Roman Catholic calendar and the Western Church, and it's found in others that derive from that, particularly the Episcopal Church in the United States and the Lutheran Church in the United States have this date in their calendar as the Nativity of St. John the Baptist. Well, let me bounce back before the time we're talking about, back to the time of the Bible and the New Testament. Why the 24th? Well, it's all pegged with the supposed date of the birth of Jesus on the 25th of December. Remember, I told you the story earlier, recounted in Luke, about the birth of John the Baptist and the pregnancy of Mary with Jesus at the time and her visit to Elizabeth. It's depicted as taking 6 months before the birth of Jesus. Well, if John is born at that time, do you start on December 25 or December 24, move backwards to June? Guess what? 6 months. And that's the date that you find first associated with the birth of John the Baptist. That's not unusual in how some of the early dates in the Christian liturgical calendar were established. Again, a subject for a future discussion if you're interested in pursuing that, because there are several sources of how dates got into the calendar. In this case, it was a date that was picked because you could count backwards for 6 months, and you arrived at the 24th of June. So it must be the date he was born if Jesus was born on Christmas. Well, if he wasn't born on Christmas, then I guess you've got to rework all of that. But remember, by the time that we're getting to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, most of those leaders in the church had assumed that those were valid dates that they could work with, didn't have our knowledge about some of the reasons why there might be other alternatives to that. Hutton also spends time, a lengthy chapter in this book, talking about things associated with the 24th of June and its origin. I will tell you that he points out that the first time that we find it in writing was in the year 506 AD, and in southern France, and at a church conference, a synod, if you will, of bishops called the Synod of Agade. And the 47 canons that came out of that, one of them points out that we are celebrating and observing the birth of John the Baptist on this date, on what to translate it to modern equivalent, on the 24th of June. He's got a kind of a detailed explanation, which I would encourage you to read if interested, about how you calculate dates within a month using the old Roman method of calends and things like that. But the 24th works for that. So it's obvious that by the time you get to the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries, that spreading throughout Christianity is now a date for the birth of John the Baptist based upon a gospel narrative and a calculation, and it becomes an important feast day. Within liturgical calendars, feast days are ranked by their importance. Easter and Christmas are the two most important ones. When other feasts are created, they are ranked. And today, within the Roman Catholic Church, the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist is a solemnity. It's the top rank below the top ones like Easter and like Christmas, and it's observed with particular important religious exercises. But in the canons that came from Agade in 506, there was the comment that 3 masses ought to be offered on that day: a vigil mass and 2 others later. A vigil mass, by the way, is on the eve of a date. The Feast of the Nativity, like all feasts in Christianity, starts the evening before at sundown, following the old Jewish tradition of the day beginning at sundown rather than at midnight. So the Vigil Mass would have been before midnight. It would have been on the 23rd. And that's of some interest to me as a Mason, because as we have recovered, at least in California, the observance of the 2 St. John's days, invariably, if I get invited to a St. John's Day celebration on the 24th of June, it's on the evening of the 24th. Properly so-called observance would be the eve before. That's when the feast actually begins. But then again, I didn't write the script, so I don't get to make the decisions. Hutton points out that there's lots and lots of symbols associated in the British Isles and elsewhere with this particular feast day in summer. First place, it has another name in addition to the Feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist. It's called Midsummer Day, Midsummer Day. I have to tell you that for a long time, as a teacher of history, that kind of puzzled me, because It's not in the middle of summer, it's close to the first day of summer, which begins in our current astronomical calendar on the 21st of June. So how can you have the 24th in the middle of it? Well, it appears, and Hutton goes into this in some detail, that it really means it's located within the midst of summer. It is, if you will, a mid-summer festival. Whether or not that's a correct attribution, I don't know, I'll leave it up to your own thoughts. This is a picture that I captured on the internet from a fire in Norway. So it's much beyond the British Isles that the observance of this particular feast is important. And in many of these Western European cultures, this was an important time. First place, a lot of our festivals, religious festivals, were associated with agricultural events. Well, this one comes, the feast of the 24th of June, sort of halfway between the spring sowing and the wheat harvest, which comes around the first week in August, around another somewhat famous day called Lammas Day. The celebration is one also of light. One of the commentaries about John the Baptist is the reason that he got associated with this particular month in the first place, whenever it occurred, was the excerpt from the Gospel of John, the 3rd chapter, the 30th verse, which John the Baptist, speaking about Jesus, says, he must increase, meaning Jesus must increase, and I must decrease, meaning I need to fade back now that I've been his forerunner to announce him, and he's going to be the important person. Well, you can see if you're dealing with the idea of increase, decrease, and this is close to the summer solstice, the increase in light, the longest day of the year, those associations come up and pop up pretty easily. And it was very probable the idea of fire associated with light became early associated with that. And you can read lots of these things as you look at folklore all across Western Europe and not just in the British Isles. It was also a time over generations, over years, that magical things came to be associated in the popular imagination with this day and this time, as they have with others. We're all familiar with the eve of All Saints' Day in November, Halloween, and the spirits that are out abroad on that day. But it wasn't the only festival that had that particular concept. May Day did, and the Feast of St. John the Baptist did as well. Now, there is a very famous playwright who wrote a play about this day. Have you ever heard of Midsummer Night's Dream in Shakespeare? The story of that and the fairies and the other things that are going on with that are based on these old stories and legends associated with, on this particular magical night of the year, the eve of the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist, all kind of strange things happen. Some of the sources talk about lingering and continuing customs about leaping over fires or over embers as a way of celebrating this day. I hope none of our Masonic lodges decide to revive that practice. It's not a good idea. But the concept of fire and light associated with that is an important thing, just as it is for the Christmas season and others like that. I want to talk about two other things that are non-Masonic, but I think they have a bearing on that. When I first started reading the New Testament and read about John the Baptist and the Gospels, it sort of all came to an end with his death when he was beheaded. And most of us know that story, by the way. The 29th of August is celebrated as another feast in the liturgical calendar, the beheading of John the Baptist. And you remember the story where Herod Antipas is having a party, and Salome dances for him, and he's so pleased he tells her, anything you want, you can have. And her mother puts her up to getting the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Okay, and that's sort of the end of the story. By the way, there is a Masonic connection with that. I'll just simply say in passing. In California, we have a lodge, actually now we have two, that work in French using a very old ritual. And one of those from 1852 has a portrayal in that particular entered apprentice degree of the head of John the Baptist. I won't say more about that now, but it's always intrigued me that it ended up the beheading of John the Baptist as a part of a Masonic degree, if you will. Well, in any event, a little bit later, after I read the story of John the Baptist, and I assume it had come to an end, here I'm reading along in the book of Acts in the 19th chapter, and John the Baptist pops up again. So let me read this. While Apollos was in Corinth, Apollos was another Christian preacher associated with Paul and with others in the early days of the church. Paul passed through the interior regions, that means basically what Turkey is today, and came to Ephesus, where he found some disciples. Well, Paul's practice was whenever he would go to a new area is to find some groups that either were Jewish believers in proselytizing, in other words, they were Gentiles who had been intrigued with Judaism and were followers of it, or perhaps early Christians who had come from Jerusalem and from the Holy Land and settled someplace else, and then he would preach to them. So that's what this reference is to. And he said to them, "Did you receive the Holy Spirit when you became believers?" And they replied, "No, we have not even heard that there is a Holy Spirit." Then Paul said, "Well, into what then were you baptized?" And they answered, "Into John's baptism." Whoa, what's going on here? When I read the earlier things in about John and the Jordan River, it was an entirely different context than this. It didn't seem like it was a continuing movement someplace in the world. And it all involved the River Jordan. It didn't involve someplace over in Turkey. But apparently, there were followers and groups that had the teachings of John the Baptist and spread someplace else. At least the author of the book of Acts knew about it and recounted it here. Which brings me to the next one here, a group called the Mandeans. We have a Mandean community here in Sacramento, quite a large one, actually. So I've been looking into some of the things that they may have brought with them. Americans mostly discovered Mandeans when we were involved with the wars in Iraq, because the Mandeans today find their center in southern Iraq, in the swamps and the reed beds and so on of the lower Euphrates River. If you take a look at their religion, it is not a Christian religion, but it's not a Jewish religion, and it's not Islam, but it's got all these elements from these early religious traditions. And they claim that their group, their religion, was founded by John the Baptist. Well, maybe the group that Paul came across in Ephesus was an early group from what became eventually the Mandeans. Baptism in living water is extremely important to them. And one of the sources I checked out said that, lo and behold, the 24th of June is a day in which children are baptized in the rivers or lakes or others wherever possible. I haven't pursued that enough to find out any more details to share with you, but it certainly is an intriguing idea that here this June 24 date may have much more than its Western European associations with Midsummer's Day. Let me just sort of wrap up what I think is some of the intriguing things about this study. First of all, I've said tonight that the references in our early rituals that we know about refer only to one St. John. My guess is it probably is John the Baptist. I think that was probably the reference, although it's arguably St. John the Evangelist as well. Secondly, they certainly were talking about both of them someplace in their Masonic work, or we never would have had what William Preston discovered and Thomas Smith Webb transferred to our current lectures on Freemasonry. And lastly, the meaning of that may be what we have in our ritual in California about the concept of a point within a circle. It's really a great symbol for me. It's a point that we are expected to know where the limits of our actions as individuals are that might potentially harm other people. Somebody put it, a wag put it, My freedom ends where your nose begins. As Freemasons, we're taught not to talk about sectarian politics or religion because we want to know a person before we put labels on them as to what we think they might be because of those things. And that's not a bad picture in the emblem or ritual of the two Saints John. Maybe Preston was correct that St. John the Baptist has more meaning for us because of his commitment to purity. That's what baptism apparently represented to him, and to the concept of correct behavior. Certainly the master of a Masonic Lodge wears a square, which we're taught is an emblem of morality, and morality is an important part of Freemasonry, obviously. So there's lots more to discover about all of this. I like the two St. John's days that we celebrate in California now. Inevitably, summer gets a better go because the days after Christmas, we're all doing some other kinds of things most of the time. But must remember that the United Grand Lodge of England was formed on December 27, 1813. So even at that time, the winter solstice, the winter observance was an important one. And that, my brothers, is what I think about St. John the Baptist.
Most worshipful Brother Cooper, thank you very much for that really deep thought paired education. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to take the screen back here.
Be glad to answer any questions or have any comments that you'd like to share about it. As I said in the beginning, I always discover more from those that I'm working with or sharing with than I learn from what I present. So you have something to share or questions to ask or something I haven't looked at?
Yeah, indeed.
Fire away.
Indeed. Brethren, at this time, if you have any questions, the floor is open for discussion. Feel free to raise your virtual hand or type your message in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to call on you, or just feel free to speak out if the time is right. Most worshipful, this is definitely an enigma, indeed, I would say. Did you form any conclusions as far as definitive conclusions in your mind if you had to make any decisions on why the choice was made?
Yeah, I think that St. John the Baptist has more of a meaning than we attributed to. We try to treat them equally in our ritual and so on. I think that's candidly a result of what Preston did in his work that ended up in our lecture. But if I had to pick somebody who was more important over time, I'd probably pick John the Baptist with one caveat, and that is the St. John's Masons. And that title, I really think, harkens back to the Gospel of John, the opening words. At the beginning was the Word, and the Mason word in Scotland. So I'm not going to go too far down that road, but I think that the ritual references, when it's singular, I really think refer to St. John the Baptist.
Yeah, it seems to lead that way.
Brian, I have a question. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't see a virtual hand here, so I don't know how to raise that, but
Don't worry about it.
It's good to see my good friend John Cooper. When I saw he was giving the talk today, I made a point of making sure I was here for this, partly because I wrote a paper about St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist. And I'd be happy to send John a copy of that. I'd like to see what his comments are. But I have a comment. I have a couple of comments, and then I have a question.
Please.
In my research, John, I found that the reason that they met at the Goose and Gridiron on St. John's Day, June the 24th, was not because it was St. John's Day, but because it was Midsummer Day. And it was one of the 4 quarter days where everybody had a holiday. Now, if you're going to have a big banquet, a big meeting like that, well, you're going to do it on a holiday when everybody's got the day off. So they were there because it was a holiday, not because it was in honor of St. John. That was the first thing I found. The second thing I found was that the earliest reference to St. John in any of the exposed rituals is around 1700 in the Sloan manuscript.
Okay.
And as you know, it continues in all the exposed rituals they talk about St. John. They don't even call him St. John the Baptist. They just call him St. John.
Right.
And so the Grand Lodge, once it got going in whatever year you want to argue, 1717 or 1721, you know that Anderson says they met on June the 24th every year until 1725. And that is when the Duke of Richmond did not want to be in London in June.
Yes.
And the reason is because he had a cricket team that was going to be playing out in the country, and that's where he wanted to be. So they agreed to hold him over 6 months, and they were going to have the annual assembly and feast at the December quarter day, which is December 25th, which is Christmas. And everybody said, oh, well, that won't work. You can't do it on Christmas. And they said, well, you know, you could hold it 2 days later, and that would be St. John the Evangelist Day. And he said, well, what's the big deal about that? And they said, well, all the London Masons are going to be upset that you're not doing it in June. But if you do it on St. John the Evangelist Day, maybe we can sell them on the idea that it's another St. John. And he bought it. And that was the first reference, the first mention of St. John the Evangelist was in 1725. Now, that was what my research showed me. Here's my question. Did you find any reference to St. John in the Gothic constitutions?
Well, to answer your question, first of all, I did not. I didn't read through Wallace MacLeod's very valuable and detailed work to make sure I didn't miss something, but I have not come across it so far.
Well, I have never found any St. John mentioned in any of the Gothic constitutions. And you know, there's over 125 of them that actually survive. Did you find any saints listed at all as the...
St. Alban shows up in there.
Thank you very much. That's the answer.
Yeah.
St. Alban was the patron saint of English Masons until Anderson took over. And for some odd reason, he left St. Alban out of it and included St. John instead. And I think it was because there was a connection between St. John the Baptist and the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, the Hospitallers, who had their priory right there in London.
Well, I think, first of all, brethren, you know that Brother Pete Norman's one of our top Masonic scholars in this country. So if he wrote a paper doing this, you're going to get good stuff, accurate stuff. And I would love to have a copy of that paper. Second of all, it does illustrate something that most of us get into. We find a place where we find some information, but it isn't the entire story. And when you lay it down alongside other ones, you have alternate hypotheses. That's how Prescott and Somers came up with their objection to the 1717 date. They said, so how do we know that? Well, and they went on from there. And that's true in terms of these others. The story of the Duke of Richmond very well might be the exact reason of that. I still think there may be something with St. John's Masonry and with in the beginning was the word. I know that in some jurisdictions, the Bible is opened to the first chapter of John for the obligation of the first degree, but I've never pursued that to find out how widespread that is or has been in our history. But thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Brother Pete, thank you. If you have a link or would like to share that to the entire group, I'm sure we would appreciate it. Thank you. Brother David, go ahead.
Hello, most worshipful brother, and thank you for your presentation tonight. And actually, right now, me and Brother Tracy are instructors in the entered apprentice degree, and we just went over the Holy Saints John of Jerusalem last week. And part of our curriculum is from worshipful brother Robert Davies' book In Search of Light. So
Yes.
in there, he talks about that when operative masonry was being practiced, that in Scotland, I forget maybe Edinburgh. I forget what city, but anyhow, the church assigned those Freemasons a area of the church where they were responsible for repairs. They were to pay a wax fee. You know, they were supposed to donate wax and whatnot to that church. And that part of the church was dedicated to the Holy Saint John the Evangelist. So that's where I understand that holy day came from. Well, why Freemasonry started associating itself with the Holy Saints John. And then the other Holy Saint, John the Baptist, from what I understand, is when the Church of England, or not church, when the Freemasons in England decided to form the Grand Lodge, and they would needed, and the carryover from operative Freemasonry of St. John's, they wanted to pick, I think, from what I would interpret it, they wanted to pick a St. John, but they didn't want to pick the same one that the Scottish had. So they picked the other one that had a really good feast day in the middle of summer instead of the middle of winter. So that is my understanding, and I just wanted to share that with you, and thank you very much. And what do you think?
I have read secondary sources that says that in England it was St. John the Evangelist that was the prominent one. In Scotland was St. John the Baptist, and I've seen sources said the opposite. I've never been able to pin down where they came to those conclusions with that. It's one of the frustrating things of reading secondary sources is no footnotes, no references, just put it out there. And it's I hate to share information if I don't know where it came from, but that is one of the ones that I have seen out there. And yes, I think we certainly know that some of the guilds, obviously most of the guilds would have a chantry or would have a portion of a church that they would take care of. My wife's historic church at Ed Walton near Nottingham, for example, the whole chancel and sanctuary fell down at the Reformation because the income had disappeared. And until the early part of the 18th century, when they rebuilt it, they only had half a church there. Well, so we know that funding and things like that from these groups was exceedingly important. And when it ceased, you could have a problem.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to maybe throw out another idea.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Tracy, did you want to follow up on anything?
And David handled it very well. I thought he summarized exactly what we discussed last week. That was I think the only thing that he left out was that the Grand Worshipful Brother from Oklahoma had suggested that I think the summer feast day worked a lot better with the London socials calendar.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Bob Davis is a good scholar. He's been a speaker many times in California, so good source.
Thank you. Brother Bruce, go ahead.
Most Worshipful Brother Cooper, I appreciate your presentation. And here in Ohio, several of our brothers have traveled over to Scotland, and I'm sure they have connections that they could talk to or email, and maybe some of our Scottish brothers over there can shed some light on the St. John's for us and that. So I will follow up with a member of my lodge, which is Kilwinning number 356 in Ohio, and I'm in Cincinnati. So, but yeah, worshipful brother, or most worshipful brother, Wayne Fisher is in the Grand Lodge Ohio line. He's orator, if I remember right, this year. So he's due to be, but I talked to a friend, I think it was Tuesday, because I was at a funeral with a brother who has been part of that group, and he said they're not due to go back over till 2028. So I think I will pursue talking to them and seeing if they can contact some of the brothers over there, and maybe they can shed some light.
You might ask him if he has a copy of D. Murray Lyon's classic book. I don't have one in my library, but that would be a source I would take a fast look at to see if he had any references in there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Just out of curiosity, I know I could Google this, but you mentioned the Mandeans. Is that how you pronounce that?
Mandeans. Yes.
Mandeans. Tell us a little bit more about that group. That's interesting.
Well, their big claim within that their teachings and so on were derived from John the Baptist, but as I understand it and read some of their writings, and I'm by no means an expert on them as a religion, that they are a semi-initiatic society. Baptism within Christianity was once much more of an initiatic experience than it is in many Christian traditions today. And it's very important to them because it carries for them the idea of purity and cleansing with that. I'm not sure how much of the Mosaic law and things like that they observe, but that's a part of their culture. They acknowledge, I read on their website, the existence of Jesus. It's more along the lines that Islam holds M.W.B, if you will. But it is a subject that somebody might be interested in digging more deeply into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Brethren, any other comments or questions for Most Worshipful here tonight?
Yes, you mean me? Tom Lamb?
Tom, go ahead. Did you have a question?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, a very interesting presentation and touches on a lot of things that I'm interested in and written about. As you can tell from my American accent, I'm from Scotland, but I've been in the States 60 years. I'm in the state of Washington, past master of a couple of lodges, Scottish Rite 33rd. Robert Cooper, I think John mentioned him, the past curator of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, wrote an excellent paper on the St. John's in Scotland and why neither of them are patron saints of the Lodge of Scotland, even to the extent that Scotland doesn't recognize the symbol of the parallel lines on the circle. In his presentation, he makes reference to an earlier paper by a member, who comes up with the theory that the reference in our ritual to the Lodge of St. John's in Jerusalem. And there was a St. John in Jerusalem that had nothing to do with the Baptist or the evangelist. And it was St. John that established the Hospitallers. And because of his work in that area, he was made a saint. And that's why it's only one John, the Lodge of St. John of Jerusalem. And that was his title, St. John of Jerusalem.
Pete mentioned the connection with the Hospitallers, and that certainly is a thread worth pursuing and investigating. Some of our stuff obviously did come from medieval times as well as earlier times in our assemblage.
I'm referring only to the theory about the origin of the name.
Yeah, I know.
It is an interesting subject, and Grand Lodge of Scotland has neither as a patron saint. Their patron saint is St. Andrew, of course, who is also the patron saint of Scotland.
Yes.
But if you want good reference to the earlier stuff that would cover some of this as well, in addition to Bob Cooper's paper, Davidson's 2 books on the origin of Freemasonry, and Bob Cooper's books on the origin of Freemasonry as well, are excellent examples.
I wish I'd known this last spring. I had lunch with him here in Lincoln when he came through on his last tour. We had lunch together, and I would have asked him about that had I thought of it.
Right. Well, I'm going back there, God willing, on 25. If any of you have questions about my research into this and want to discuss any matter, and have a number of papers, I think you can get my email from this this presentation, and I'd be happy to discuss these things with you. Am I right? Am I the only decision? No. There's no one person speaks for Freemasonry recognize that. But another thing to remember that most of the people that formed the Lodge of Westminster and London were Scottish exiles. So thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. I also had 2 chats.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Brother Gullah, go ahead.
Thanks, Brian. I was just thinking of something when you asked the question about the Mandians. I follow a YouTube channel called Religion for Breakfast, and this college professor of New Testament studies. I believe he has a segment on Mandians. So if you jump on YouTube and look for Religion for Breakfast, you can search his site for Mandians if you want to find a little bit more introductory information. That's all I had.
YouTube is it's an intriguing source out there as part of this. I looked up and I had forgotten about Mussorgsky's work on St. John's Eve on Bald Mountain, the music for that. Didn't have time to share that, but you find all kinds of intriguing things out there on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes too much.
Sometimes too much.
Brother Donald, go ahead.
Yes, just wanted to share a few things. Where I'm from, Quebec, Canada, obviously St. John's Day is very very important to us. It's considered our provincial national holiday. But also there's a lodge that meets here on the top of a mountain, Owl's Head, met since 1857, if I'm not mistaken. And it meets every year on the Saturday that is closest to St. John's Day. And it's done so recently up until COVID. And after that, the owners of the mountain, which is also a ski resort, wouldn't operate the chairlift for most of the brethren who were elderly, so they moved the meeting to September. But up until then, they always met on the Saturday closest to St. John the Baptist Day. So it's very interesting. It's and we have brethren from all over the world that come to participate on that ritual that's held at the top of the mountain in this little area that very difficult to know how to get to it, but it's an outdoor lodge, an actual outdoor lodge.
Very nice.
You've been to it?
I have.
Okay.
It's such an area that when you're sitting on the rocks that form the lodge, and if you lean too far back, you actually fall off the mountain. So it's a little hazardous, but it's a very nice experience. You can observe some pictures on the internet.
All right. Thank you. Where's Brother Dan? I believe you have a question.
I do. Most worshipful Brother Cooper, thank you for your presentation. As I'm listening to your presentation this evening, and then also in the discussion, the thought that becomes, I think, most outstanding to me is the extent to which our Freemasonry has Christian influences. And I'm wondering if you could address the extent of those Christian influences and then the manner in which we have transitioned to a more universalist approach to Freemasonry.
Yeah, I think that's a very important observation. And I wrestled with that as a possible subtopic on this when I was dealing with Preston's comments about that, and then Webb's version of that Christian Freemasonry would use the two Saints John rather than King Solomon. And yet, when I go back to the first part of the 18th century, the formation of that Grand Lodge, we know that some of the Masons that were not particularly keen about this new Grand Lodge forming burned a lot of their manuscripts and books. We'd love to know what they were trying to get rid of that was, they didn't want them to fall into the wrong hands. And when you go to the constitutions of 1723, and particularly the first charge on religion, which of course we observed last year as an important observance of that, it was an issue in the early ritual that I think it's pretty clear to me, and I pulled some of this from Rick Berman's work on that. If you've ever read Dr. Rick Berman's work on the formation of the Grand Lodge, it's excellent. That those that were involved with the formation of that Grand Lodge were up to two things, basically. One was to support the Hanoverian dynasty, but the other was to transform Freemasonry into the modern era, and particularly with the concept of Baconian philosophy, empirical philosophy, and using not the mystical side, but the rational side of Freemasonry as its organizing principle. Well, that's for me what shows up in the first charge. It's a rationalizing statement that we used to be something, Christian, if you will, but now we're good men and true. But that didn't happen quite so easily. The struggle over that persisted a long time. And I think part of the reason of the ancients' formation was that they felt we were leaving some of these things out of Freemasonry. Ultimately, I think the universality issue won. I noticed that England, the Supreme Council for England and Wales, just removed its Christian requirement for their version of the ancient and accepted rite. From my standpoint, it makes sense that Freemasonry started as a sectarian experience and expanded into universality. But some of our rites and degrees to this day within Freemasonry still have the Christian requirement, like Sweden is an example, Swedish rite is an example, or our Knight Templar and things like that. So there's this ambiguity, and we've not resolved it even after all of these years. Maybe it's a good thing. Part of the things that attracts me to Freemasonry is its ambiguity, and it does not take simplistic answers to things, and I'm okay with that. But certainly it is Freemasonry as we practice it in California at the craft level is not a Christian experience. Don't know whether that answers your question, but that's pretty much how I would see it.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, great response, actually. I would agree. Brethren, any other questions or comments for our guest tonight? Most worshipful, is your Lodge of Research doing good?
We are. I'm past master of 3 of our California research lodges, most recently Golden Compasses up here in Sacramento. We have well-attended meetings, and our current Grand Master is our junior warden. So we have a lot of connections to things beyond that. Very much have enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed the service I had with the Philalethes Society and with other places through the years, including presentations of other conferences in Europe, Texas Lodge of Research back in 1994. So it's lots of fun places to do this kind of stuff in Masonry. And this is my first experience of the Rubicon Masonic Society. My bad, if you will. I was unaware of it until you contacted me, but I'm very pleased with what you're doing. And if you keep me on your email list, I'd like to see if I can tune in for some of your future ones as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll have to have you to Lexington one day.
Can I add a quick discussion to the last question?
Sure, Tom,
I
go
think
ahead.
part of the reason that religion disappeared from Freemasonry was the connection between Freemasonry, early Freemasonry in London, and the Royal Society. The Royal Society decided to cut out religion from its formation because it wanted people of all religions to be able to be a member. And as many of the Royal Society were Freemasons, and Freemasons of importance at the beginning, it followed on to the Grand Lodge of London and Westminster. On the other hand, Scotland was strongly still Roman Catholic and kept the religious aspect until the attempt by the formation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Brother Brian.
Yes.
The gentleman, one of our brothers, mentioned the going up to the top of the mountain.
Yes.
The other thing that I've heard about, but I have not attended, is in Tennessee, and there is a going into the belly of the earth in a cave. and the Master Mason degree is done there. And you can Google it, and evidently there's a few short YouTube videos that must talk about it that are only about a minute long. So, but I thought I'd let everybody know about that in case you get close to it. So, has anybody been to that?
There is actually a cave degree in Kentucky, in central Kentucky, in Rockcastle County. The next one will be on October 13th at Saltpeter Cave.
Thank you for that.
It is a very neat experience.
Yeah, I've heard that when they turn the lights out, it is truly darkness.
Thank you. Brethren, last call. Any questions or comments? All right. Most Worshipful John, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and hope to see you again in the future. And unless you have anything else to add, we'll proceed with the closing of our evening. Okay. Brethren, our next Masonic education is Monday, October 28th, same time. Jeremiah Beaver will be giving a presentation entitled Notes from the Beehive. And Worshipful Brother Dan, I know you've had some communication with Jeremiah. Do you have any insight on his presentation to share?
I don't know specifically about his presentation. I have seen other presentations of his in the past, and I can tell you that whatever he does, you will absolutely want to see. This is a young man from Broad Ripple Lodge in Indianapolis, and he is one of the up and coming lights in Freemasonry.
Great. Thank you. For those of you who will be joining us on this Friday and Saturday, we very much look forward to seeing you. Hopefully you have all of your accommodations scheduled and planned out. Hopefully the weather cooperates, but one way or another, we will make sure it is an event to be remembered. So look forward to seeing any of you who are coming to see us this weekend.
Brother Brian, could you give me the last name of the speaker? I didn't get that down.
Beaver, Beaver, like the animal.
Great. Thank you. And I'll see you at the end of the week.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you. Safe travels. And in case you're curious as to what this conference might be like, you can see the conference that we recorded and produced last year. It's on YouTube. It's on our YouTube channel. Feel free to check it out and let us know what you think. And with any luck, we'll have a nice production to share after this one as well. Good resource that I would encourage everyone to take a look at if you have not already is our very own Worshipful Brother Bizak's recently created website, thecraftsman.org. And this website, Worshipful Brother Bizak, has, as you know, he's an accomplished Masonic author, many great sources of education, papers, articles, essays, commentaries from other Masons as well. So it's a great resource for anything related to Freemasonry. Please go check it out. And the Philalethes Society. Worshipful Brother John Cooper, would you want to say a few words about the Philalethes Society?
Well, only that I think it's one of the best Masonic journals going. And if you are not a member, consider going online and finding out how to become one.
Yep, indeed. Anyone that does not already have a copy of our transactions from the Rubicon Masonic Society Volume 1, it is available for purchase on Amazon. And we appreciate you checking that out. And we'll have hopefully a Volume 2 here in the near, not too distant future as well. Additionally, of course, if you have not seen our documentary, The Masonic Table, please go check that out as well. It's on Amazon. And what you see in that documentary will be very similar to what we will be doing this Friday evening. So look forward to it. Brethren, friends, are there any other final comments for the evening? Chad, no comments from you? Come on, you got to say hello.
You just got to hear my voice, don't you, brother?
There you go. There you go.
Keep poking me. Yeah, I really wish I could join you guys this weekend. That Saturday is my final rededication for the Grand Lodge of Illinois. It's my retirement activity. I'm the assistant grand chaplain, and there's a huge prayer that goes into that nobody else could fill in for me. So I had that prior obligation. Otherwise, I would be very happy to join you brothers in Kentucky.
Well, we understand. Just some friendly love.
I hope you have a wonderful event. I'm sure you will, brothers. Be well.
Thank you. You too. Worshipful Brother Dan, would you please do the honors, sir?
Brothers, join me in prayer. Supreme Architect of the universe, accept our humble praises for the many mercies and blessings which thy bounty has conferred on us, and especially for this friendly and social intercourse. Pardon, we beseech thee, whatever thou hast seen amiss in us since we have been together, and continue to us thy presence, protection, and blessing. Make us sensible of the renewed obligations we are under to love thee supremely and to be friendly to each other. May all our irregular passions be subdued, and may we daily increase in faith, hope, and charity, but more especially in that charity which is the bond of peace and the perfection of every virtue. May we so practice thy precepts that we may finally obtain thy promises and find an entrance through the gates into the temple and the city of God. Amen.
So mote it be. Thank you, Dan. Brethren, again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Our next meeting is October 28th, 7 p.m. If you know of anyone that might be interested in joining us, feel free to send them to rubiconmasonicsociety.com/RSVP. Brethren, life moves very fast, and may these meetings allow you to pause that sand that goes through the hourglass just for a little bit so we can enjoy the company of each other and do it again in the near future. Have a great evening. We'll talk to you soon, and thank you.